Oh, I thought I'd already hit record. It sounds like now we finally are recording.
Okay.
Johannes, I thought because we have lots of young musicians listening in, it'd be interesting to talk about your early years as a young musician.
Yeah.
You grew up in Meissen near Dresden. I understand that you came from a very musical family. Your father was a cantor and an organist. You have brothers who've also gone on to become professional musicians. What was your family life like?
Yeah, as you said, my father, he was an organist in the Lutheran church. And in Germany, the Lutheran church, especially in the part where I grew up in Saxony, sort of that was part of the East Germany. The Lutheran church was historically pretty strong. In East German times under the communist regime, of course, it was not allowed to blossom or to be very active, but still from the past, there was a very rich musical culture. If you think that Johann Sebastian Bach worked half of his life in Leipzig, which is only 80 kilometers away from where I grew up. So that tradition was very deep rooted, not just in the bigger cities, but also in the little villages. Every village had his own organist, and that's quite an extraordinary thing to think about. I remember that I traveled a lot around Meissen, or sort of in that area with my father, because he was sort of how Kirchenmusikdirektor was called. So he was responsible for all the church music in those little places around Meissen. And there were 30, 40 villages with organists, and they had their priest, the organist, and a church choir and a children choir. And they managed somehow to perform at Christmas times, the Christmas oratorio.
Yeah,
I don't know how it sounded. And when I grew up, so I learned to play the organ, of course, and piano and violin, and then trumpet. So I started quite early to play gigs in those little villages with Bach cantatas. And so that was the weekly routine. Sunday church service. I was in the boys' choir. I know in the children's choir. It was not the boys' choir. Children's choir. I turned the pages for my father, who played always a Bach preludium at the beginning and the Bach preludium at the end. There was lots of Bach around.
Lots of Bach.
Yeah.
Part of the world.
Which was great. And when I left home, when I was 16, I left home to go to the university. I did not attend the organ concert for 10 years. I had enough for a while, but it sort of, yeah.
Can I ask, all those small churches, were they very old churches with Baroque organs, or were they more modern instruments?
No, there were, most of them were old organs, also with mechanical traktor, mechanical transmission. There were some from the Romantic era. Romantic in the organ building means early 20th century. So with the pneumatic, also where the everything is moved by air. But mostly mechanical organs from, I'd say, late 19th century. Very, very badly tuned, and yeah, some of the keys didn't work. So, but it was fantastic because I learned to repair organs when my father had organ concerts somewhere. So he took me and my friend along, and I said, "Oh, this one doesn't work. Have a look. What's not right?" So when we
go in there with a little hammer or a screwdriver.
Yeah. Went into the organ and tried to find it out. Yeah.
And did you learn so many different musical instruments? Piano, organ, trumpet, violin, because you already had an interest in becoming a conductor, or did that come later?
Well, to learn piano and organ was partly because my father, that was his job, and he taught many kids piano, and I learned the organ because then I could play services or funerals or baptisms or the weddings in some of the places around where I grew up. So yeah, and for tourists coming to Meissen was quite a tourist city with the Dresden Chinese, the famous porcelain,
Yeah.
the manufactory, and the organ we had in our church was a big one with, I think, 6,000 pipes. So when I was 9 and 10 years old, I had 2 showpieces by Bach, the D minor toccata, and another one which I could play. I just reached the pedals with my feet, and to present the organ and do a sort of bit of show how the organ works. Yeah. And then the violin came soon after, because my father needed violin players in for cantatas and to play in concerts. Yeah. And then trumpet, we had a brass choir in the church as well. So
okay. And when did you first remember having the idea or the desire, I want to conduct orchestras? Did you go to an orchestra concert, and was there a particular moment that you remember?
No, I don't. I didn't hear many orchestra concerts at all, because in Meissen there were no orchestra concerts presented. It was a small place, 20,000 people lived there, or 40,000 at the time. No, I started studying trumpet at the university, and after a year I thought, well, I would like to do a little bit more on the piano, and thought, coaching singers and instrumentalists would be fun, because the repertoire is much broader than just for the trumpet. The trumpet has 5 or 6 concertos to practice, or at least back then. Nowadays we have many more. And so I approached the professor for opera coaching, and he said, why do you want to do that? Oh, maybe conducting later. And he said, why not now? So, and then I changed from trumpet to piano and conducting in my second year, and then continued as conducting with major.
Yeah. Before we start talking about your early conducting experiences, I want to ask, I don't know if the QIO players realize that Dresden is very close to the eastern border of Germany, and it's just across the border is the Czech Republic, which is where Mahler grew up. And Iglau, by Australian standards, it's probably only an hour's drive from Dresden to Iglau, or something like that.
Well, it's a bit longer, but nowadays it's a good hour from Dresden to Prague. Yeah. There's a new autobahn, so yeah.
But I wanted to ask, do you feel a closeness to Mahler's music because there's that geographical proximity? Do you think there's any sort of shared culture between the Czech Republic and Eastern Germany? I mean, of course, for a long time, that border didn't really exist, or it was much more, it went one way or the other way, depending on, the Holy Roman Empire and the politics and the history of that part of the world.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's true. Well, Iglau or the Irchalava was never part of Germany. It maybe for a very short time it was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and of course Mahler grew up speaking German, and the cultural connection is my father's family is from the Bohemian side, which is part of that era, and the notion or the sentiment or the melancholia of folk songs is quite similar. Mm-hmm. So I feel very close to Dvorak's and Smetana's music, and I was lucky when I was 13, and that was probably my first big orchestra concert I went to. My father took me to Prague, to the Prague Spring Festival, which is always at the beginning of May, and begins with Ma Vlast, my homeland by Smetana. So I went there when I was 13, and it was just overwhelming, that experience. I will never forget that. And that kind of music is close to Mahler's music too. So yes, and to make it short, I feel that's a little bit my home, that music.
Yeah, and because we spoke about this a little bit last week with Paul and Trish, just how Mahler takes all sorts of vernacular or popular music of the time and folds that into his symphonies. You have tavern music, you have military music, you have church music. It's all kind of quoted and and wrapped into his symphonies. And he famously said, you know, a symphony should embrace the world. It should have everything in it. Do you also recognize, you know, in the brass band music that you would have played in Meissen as a young trumpeter, is there similarities there as well that you can kind of hear in the Mahler symphonies?
Well, when we played the brass stuff, that was more church music and Baroque music, not so much the band music, but of course that kind of military music you find in Mahler so amazingly captured. I mean, that's fascinating how he brings in those early childhood memories of his, because they had barracks in his little town as everywhere, and they played it in the evening the Zapfenstreich. I don't know if you can translate that word. Zapfenstreich.
It's probably the equivalent to I mean, it's the call really saying that the day is over, right?
Yes, as a sort of a signal, or the more a short piece which signals the end of the day.
Yeah.
And then of course you have that kind of signals a lot in Mahler's symphonies, and then of course the march music when there were celebrations, when there were special days, and the band from the military marched through the little place of Iglau. So that must be a really deep impression on Mahler, and it's always in his symphonies.
I think often growing up in Australia, we're sort of unaware really of how we're accustomed to perhaps marching bands and brass bands that we hear on Anzac Day or on days of ceremonial days and so on. And of course, there's that tradition in Europe as well. But, you know, we forget that until the advent of radio and other ways of communicating on the battlefield, like your military band, it was also a way of communicating in the midst of battle, you know, so you had all your various calls for your instruments for the general to kind of send his troops charging in one direction or the other. And there was this very, very important function for brass music. And, you know, was, you could hear it above the kind of the tumult of battle. And I think often in Mahler, you hear those kind of those signal calls as well. You also, you know, in the Third Symphony, he quotes the post horn, which of course is the horn that the postman carried when he came to a small village, and he blew to sort of say the postman's here. And I just love that in Mahler, you get these little vignettes, this little, it's like a painting of a late 19th century world, you know, in all its musical richness. I only realized that really when I went to Europe and realized how an orchestra is like this cultural memory of hundreds of years of tradition.
And when you mentioned earlier that Mahler uses folk tunes and that kind of simple music in his works, he very seldom quotes an actual tune, but he writes tunes in the style of that folk music. Like in the First Symphony, where he uses from his song cycle, Lieder eines fahrenden Gesellen, the Wayfarers songs. That music is his own music. He did not take existing songs or the melodies, but they are all in the same mode, or in the same type style of folk songs, and that makes it so personal in a way.
It also feels like a folk memory, because, you know, he set all those songs from Des Knaben Wunderhorn, which had been compiled a long time earlier in 1806, but no other composer had really set them to music until Mahler came along. And so you do get the sense that he's using these folk traditions that stretch back, and he's putting his own reflections on.
That's a very, very interesting thought, Simon, that those Sammlung, collections of folk poetry were done in the early 19th century. They started in around 1805 with Brentano, and it was for great interest for all the writers and people who worked in literature.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was a time where the focus suddenly went on the urban tradition, coming from a time where counts and kings ruled the culture. And then suddenly, after the era of enlightenment, people started to looking at what's actually there in the culture of the normal people, the simple people, the peasants. Yeah. And paintings were painted about a simple life in a village, and not about kings anymore. And Mahler sort of found great interest in those looking backwards rather than forwards. And that is sort of the essence of romantic. Yeah. The essence of romantic culture, of romantic tradition, and of romantic music, that to look back. And that makes him an especially fascinating composer, because he looked in both directions. Yeah. Back to the past and forward, like no other composer at his time.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I'd love to go back and just talk a little bit more about your training as a young musician in Dresden, because many people listening today are also thinking about perhaps pursuing a career in music, or at that time in their lives where they're training to be a professional musician. When I arrived in Weimar, which is where I studied conducting a long time, it was a little bit later, and in 1996, 1997, and the Berlin Wall had already come down and Germany had reunified. But I had a very strong sense coming to Weimar, which was also in the old East Germany, that there was an Eastern German musical tradition that I, as a foreigner, was largely unaware of, and a very particular way of teaching conducting. And my one of my conducting professors, Gunther Karlitz, he was very dry, very. I kind of came to Europe expecting, I wanted to learn how to conduct like Simon Rattle or Claudio Bardo, and, full of energy and enthusiasm. And he would just cut me off and sort of say, like that, nothing will be together. And just that kind of Kapellmeister training of how you conduct an opera with a minimal rehearsal, so that the players can play and so that it works. Was that your experience as well?
Yeah, that was my experience, exactly. And it is a fascinating tradition in Germany, or let's say in the German-speaking countries, where, because of the history of so many small states or kingdoms, we have an enormous number of little opera houses. Not little, small, some bigger. And nowadays, I think there are 80 opera companies in Germany. Germany and Austria, full-time, working around the year with full-time orchestra, choir, soloists, and everything involved. And sort of the culture of having so many places where opera was performed every evening, basically, except Monday probably, required many people to conduct. Logical. And they produced many new productions every year with very little rehearsal time. And in order to communicate with an orchestra with little rehearsal time, you need a technique to make it work naturally. And if you watch videos and all the young QYO players, they are very, very good in finding things online and on YouTube. Google old conductors, yeah? Hermann Abendroth, Fritz Busch, and Keilbert, and what their names is. They are very, what you said, dry sometimes, but very clear in their musical, in their conducting gestures. So, and my teacher, he was chief conductor of the opera in Dresden, and his teacher was actually Hermann Abendroth, who was in Weimar as well. So he was extremely good in his conducting technique, and I had a similar experience. So he cut lots of this exciting conducting off, and then nobody can read your third beat. Nobody can read this. Yeah, be clear. Yeah, that's not necessary. Be clear. And It was at times a frustrating experience, because I thought there should be more about it. Huh? And in a way, he didn't give that to me.
Yeah.
But when I had my first job in an opera house after I finished university, and I was quite young, I was just 22, turned 22. So one of my first tasks was to conduct an operetta, a night in Venice, Strauss, and of course no rehearsal, just go in the pit and conduct the bloody thing. And thanks God I had a good training in conducting technique.
Yeah.
Otherwise it would have been a complete disaster.
And those operettas, they're some of the most difficult things to conduct. You know,
Yeah.
there's so many changes in tempo. You've got singers with heaps of rubato. The other thing is that perhaps if you're only playing symphony orchestras, you don't realize that singers, they're not always looking at the conductor all the time. They also have their role that they have to inhabit. And so to actually keep all that together, I remember being in the pit for the first time, and you feel that, you know, the opera chorus is going one way, the tenor's going the other way, and you've got the orchestra, and you're trying to kind of steer it all and stay on the same path. And it takes that kind of combination of technique and also empathy to sense what the singers need. I think, do you agree that conducting that kind of repertoire is a fantastic training? I certainly felt that it was.
Well, I think, and I say it from my own experience, is probably the best training you can get. And saying that means it's much harder for young conductors nowadays, and especially here in Australia, where you don't have those opportunities to grow and to work in such an environment. Yeah, and coming back to Mahler, if you like, in terms of conducting, I mean, he was not just one of the greatest composers at his time. He was a very, very well respected and thought and looked after conductor. And he did exactly that career path. Yeah? He worked before he went to the Vienna Staatsoper as music director, he was in 8 or 10 opera houses as a Kapellmeister. And if you look, you can find reviews of his work in Olmütz, as an example, where he worked for 2 or 3 years as a Kapellmeister. The sheer amount of operas and operettas he conducted in those years is just breathtaking. And again, there were no many rehearsals, and they were very well received. So he was an excellent conductor in the opera pit, and his experience of being in the pit and conducting opera orchestras is all going into his symphonies.
Yeah. I have to say, I love the fact that when you sit down and start studying a Mahler symphony, there's so many instructions how to conduct it, you know, where he'll say accelerando, but start really gradually, slowly going into 2. And you find if you do exactly that, it works. You know, he kind of really knew what the conductor needed to show in order for the orchestra to play what he was writing.
Exactly.
Yeah. I wonder, you know, after those early years in your career where you were conducting in a number of houses like Rostock and then you were in Dresden, you know, big moment in 1989 when the Berlin Wall comes down. You know, what did that mean for you as an East German, and what did that mean for you as a young conductor, you know, thinking about your career and where you might go next?
Yeah, that's a big topic, Simon. I will cut it really short because that was a very important part of my life at that time. It implied all the political turmoil at that time, and that's so long ago especially for our young listeners now, 30 years ago. And the East German, if you try to think what was it in East Germany, think of North Korea. Yeah, that is something we know a little bit more nowadays. East Germany was not as bad as North Korea, but very close. So it was a very suppressed regime, communist regime controlled by the Russian Empire in a way, Soviet Union, and And I belonged to a group which was called the Neue Forum, a new forum, which tried to demonstrate against that system. And we did not expect the wall to come down, but we hoped for changes within the system. Well, that didn't happen. The wall came down unexpectedly fast with a landslide of changes for everyone in the community, and good changes, less good changes, some disastrous for people who were rooted in the old system and lost everything. But it was changes for the better in general for everyone. And I was in Dresden at that time at the opera as a Kapellmeister. I was 29 years old when it happened. I had a young family with 2 children, and it changed everything. It changed everything, and it opened suddenly the door to the world, if you want. Until then, I was not allowed to travel outside East Germany except Czechoslovakia, Poland until late 70s, until early 80s, and Poland was closed. Bulgaria and Hungary, so 4 countries, and Romania until Romania was sort of blocked as well. So, suddenly the world was open, and the first experience after the wall came down was everything in East Germany was bad, everything in West Germany was good. Very simple. Everything an East German academic has learned was 20 years behind. Everything the West German knew was 20 years ahead. So there was this gap in culture, in education. I realized very soon that didn't apply for the musical, for the training in music. Quite the opposite in a way. So I applied for a job in Hanover and in Freiburg at the same time, and I was surprised I got both. In Hanover was a first Kapellmeister, in Freiburg was a chief conductor, and that was a little bit overwhelming for me. Then I started in Freiburg as chief conductor when I was 33 and had to deal with a huge number of new things like union rules and ways to communicate with the politicians, with all sorts of things, which I had not learned. What I had learned is how to conduct an orchestra and how to do an opera well, which was only part of the job. But I had to learn, and I tried to learn fast. And and then I was invited to conduct in Sydney, Hansel and Gretel.
What were your first impressions of Australia?
Oh, it was absolute fantastic. I had never seen a palm tree in my life. And I arrived in Sydney late in the evening, and Sherilyn Kim Morley from the opera picked me up at the airport and drove me to my apartment in Woolloomooloo Bay. And next morning I walked to the opera house with a botanical garden, and I thought I'm in a dream. I saw palm trees. My God! And
then the opera house. When you walk into that opera house, it's such majestic.
It's fantastic, and that was a wonderful time. And Hansel and Gretel was, of course, one of my pieces.
You would have known it inside.
Backwards, and there was a very good production by Elisha Machinski, wonderful, and they got prizes at production. I don't know. Did you see that, Simon?
No, I don't think I ever did, because I don't remember in my time at Opera Australia that a staging of Hansel and Gretel. I conducted Hansel and Gretel a lot when I went to Germany and in Hamburg and
Hamburg. No,
it was always on at Christmas time, so you'd always play it for the kids at Christmas. It was a bit weird because it ends with them throwing the witch in the oven, but somehow it was always the Christmas.
Interesting. The production in Sydney by Elisha Machinski was a new production. It was the first staged production of Hansel and Gretel in Australia, and Elisha, I don't know if you met him, but our listeners probably don't know him. Elisha Machinski, he died last year actually, from COVID in London, being early 70s. He grew up in East Asia and in Australia, but has a European roots and family. He was from a big Jewish family, and he did a fantastic production incorporating sort of this European background, but set it in Australian set. It was set in a house of a simple Australian family in the 50s, and it worked so well. It was a fascinating production. And compared with your Hamburg production, which was, when you conducted, it's 30 years old.
Very old, yeah.
Yep. And the musicians in the orchestra, I conducted that production too, for 2 years. And the musicians in the orchestra, remember, they saw that one when they were children. So it was in the sort of program for more than 30 years, exactly the same production with new singers every year.
And it was one of those pieces, you know, again, for the QIS musicians, until you go to one of these big German opera houses, you just have no idea of the volume of repertoire that these houses play. You know, in Hamburg, they'd do 35 to 40 operas every single year, which on the one hand is incredibly impressive, but on the other hand, it means that there's virtually no rehearsal time for many, many, many pieces. And I remember conducting that Hansel and Gretel production and just getting so frustrated because the orchestra was playing so loud and so heavy. And I went to the artistic committee of the orchestra and said, is there anything that we can do? And they said, well, we haven't rehearsed it in 30 years. And so a lot of the new musicians, they're coming into the orchestra and they're more or less, I think it's incredibly stressful too for young musicians coming into that system, because, you know, I think about it as a conductor, gosh, how stressful I have to conduct an opera with no rehearsal, but it's also incredibly stressful for your second flute or your third horn or your principal viola, who often are having to play these works with very little rehearsal. So we managed to organize a rehearsal for the following year. Just one. You know, that was always, it's great experience, but very challenging at the same time. So where are we? We were in Australia. And then I remember when I first started at Opera Australia as a young assistant conductor, I worked with you on Rigoletto, and I think you threw me into the pit straight away so that you could have a listen to some balance. And that was the very first time, even though I trained in Germany, it was the first time I'd actually been in an opera pit, you know, kind of trying to coordinate singers and orchestra and chorus and so on. And I remember in that moment thinking, gosh, you know, all the enthusiasm in the world for this opera isn't going to help me keep these singers and orchestra together. And realizing that actually using those technical lessons that I'd learned in Germany would really help. And I remember also Jennifer Martin Smith, a repetiteur at Opera Australia. She always said, "Oh, Johannes is my favorite conductor. He never says much, but I know exactly what he wants."
Yeah. See, I forgot. I thought we worked first together on Salome in Melbourne, but there was a Rigoletto before that.
Yeah, and then I think the following, even before that, Salome in Melbourne
was Rosenkavalier.
Yeah, and there was a Barber of Seville, and you very generously even talked to the opera administration and said, "Oh, I'd like Simon to have some performances," and so I ended up conducting the last four performances of Barber of Seville in a run that you conducted, I think, the first 8 performances or so. And then I assisted you on Rosenkavalier as well.
Yeah, that was in the same year. Yeah, you know, talking about Barber of Seville, another style of opera where you think it's also easy. Yeah, like operetta sounds so easy, sounds so much fun, but I have the biggest respect of these Rossini operas. I rather conduct the Rosenkavalier, but a Barber of Seville. I think,
and I think sometimes because the orchestras underestimate them too, they look easy on the page, but that sometimes makes the conductor's job all the harder. You know, when the orchestra thinks, "Oh, it's Rossini tonight or La Traviata tonight," but it requires incredible attentiveness and awareness from everyone.
Yeah. That's right.
I wanted to encourage everybody who's listening to send me a question if you have one. Use the chat feature and send me a question, and then I'd love to throw to you to ask your question directly of Johannes. You'll just need to unmute yourself when I invite you to ask your question. So far, I've only got one from Mike Bernays. Mike, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? Are you there, Mike?
So just unmuting myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, it's just not really. I'm fascinated. I love listening to your stories about your early career with Johannes too, Simon. But I thought we were going to talk more about the symphony. But anyway, my question relates to the symphony.
Yeah.
I really wanted to ask this question of Paul Dean last week, actually, but didn't get around to it. But I have two questions. Firstly, Johannes, where do you see the symphony as an art form in 50 years' time? And secondly, I've just been reading the latest edition of Limelight. It's nearly a month old now, so maybe there'll be another edition out soon. But there's an article, there's two articles in it, actually. One is about another two new performances of Richard Mills' Voss over 30 years later, after the last performances. And another article about new works by new composers, or contemporary composers, and how we avoid having new works becoming one-hit wonders.
Sorry, can you say that last one again? How we avoid
how we avoid having new works becoming one-hit wonders.
Yeah.
So recently, QIS has been directly and indirectly involved in the world premieres of two major symphonies, one by John Rotar, which QIS has performed, another one by Paul Dean indirectly, because Paul Dean is the conductor of Queensland Youth Symphony Orchestra 2. And here we are today, we're talking about Mahler, over 100 years after his symphonies were written. Do you think there's any hope for our modern symphonists?
Good, yes. Okay, there were two questions. The first one, where do I see the symphony in 50 years' time? Well, that's pretty difficult to predict, obviously. I think the symphonic repertoire we have in our canon right now will survive if we manage to keep orchestras and similar organizations alive. I'm very hopeful, and actually I'm very positive that that will happen, because over the last 50 years or longer, we heard the notion that, well, classical music and orchestras are things of the past and they won't survive the next 50 years. And this is a continuing argument or discussion. And we still have orchestras and opera houses around the world, and we have audience. If you look at our audience here for the QSO, the concerts are, most of them, sold out, and people are interested to listen to that music. So I'm very hopeful that in 50 years' time, orchestras still exist and play the repertoire they play nowadays, plus new repertoire. And where's the chance for new written symphonies, new written music? Well, I think it's a process which happened always and will happen in the future as well, and happens right now too. Many new music is written, only a few pieces will survive, and they will be performed in the future as well. So if you look back at Mahler's times, for instance, look at old program brochures from the Vienna Staatsoper when he was music director there. 80% of the operas he conducted, I don't even know the title, because they were once performed or just for 10 years, and then they disappeared from the programs because they didn't have the quality to remain in the canon. And similarly with symphonic repertoire, the really good music will survive, and there has to be more music written than music we will continue to play. That is the nature of things. And if you can't expect that in 1 year only one symphony is written, and that one will be the one we will repeatedly play. And I think that's partly our responsibility as conductors or as program directors to search for the really good, modern, contemporary music and put it on the programs. I just recorded a new piece by Melody Oetwesch, The Ruler of the Hive, and another piece for ABC recording. We did it with a TSO 2 weeks ago. 2 pieces by Richard Mills and 2 pieces by Melody Earthwash. And that one particular piece, The Rule of the Hive, she wrote for the Tasmanian Symphony Orchestra 3 years ago. I performed it here with the Conservatorium Orchestra 2 years ago, and this year with the MSO in 3 concerts, because I found that a really good piece. And we need to look after those pieces. And if the conductors don't do it, and the program director, then no one else. So that's a big responsibility, I feel, as a conductor, to have big ears and listen where is the good music and make sure it will be performed the second time and a third time.
Great. I think we've got Johannes for another 5 or 10 minutes. Johannes, please just tell us when you need to leave.
Well, I have a rehearsal at 10, but it's a staging rehearsal, so that will start slowly.
Okay, great. We've got another 3 or 4 questions that have come through. One from Jess Possel. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, Jess?
Hi.
Hi.
In 2017, I saw Vienna Phil perform Mahler 6.
Mm-hmm.
And with the hammer hits, there were only 2, and the third was omitted. So I'd like to know your thoughts on the superstition, and if you personally would omit the third.
Well, well, to be honest, I forgot when I performed it last time, the Mahler 6, that was here with the QSO. If we did 2 or 3, I think we did 2, because isn't it that Mahler omitted the third one?
I think so. I mean, there's a few questions about Mahler 6 too, also with the order of the movements.
Yes. Yeah, I do the order, the new order or the old order, the one he was first performed. I think that works better. Yeah. So that's simple. And as far as I remember, Mahler omitted the third hit for whatever reasons, and there are a bit mystical reasons behind, maybe, or not, or maybe just practical reasons. And I think I went last time with that solution. And where did you hear the Vienna Philharmonic perform Mahler 6?
That was in the Vienna Opera House. Oh, I'm pretty sure.
Probably in the Musikverein, in the concert house.
Yeah, it was a really large building. It was, I can't remember. But
it was in the Musikverein, a beautiful building with lots of golden ornaments and beautiful sounding. It's an most amazing stage. I performed there with my orchestra in Graz. We did a guest concert every year, and to be there and know that most of the music we play from that area, from that Viennese era, has been performed for the first time in that hall, and that's quite a thought when you're there.
Yeah, it was very surreal.
Yes.
Can I also just chime in and say that I don't know whether the QIS musicians would be aware that Johannes was for 8 years, I think, music director of the Graz Opera, and Graz is also a historically incredibly significant opera house. It's a beautiful, beautiful old opera house in the second largest city in Austria, plays an enormous repertoire, but has also been home to some incredibly important premieres. For example, Salome was premiered in Graz in 1906. So it must have also been quite a thrill working in the Graz Opera for the years that you were there, Johannes.
Yeah, Bruckner's 5th Symphony was performed for the first time in Graz with my not my orchestra, but that orchestra.
We've got a couple of other questions. Isabel, you've got a question. Do you want to go ahead?
Sure, thanks, Simon. So, Johannes, when you returned to QSO after some time away, did you find that the orchestra had a different sound or approach, and compared to the last time that you'd conducted them? And I guess, what do you look for or prioritize generally with orchestral sound? Not obviously it will change depending on the repertoire, but do you have a general set of qualities that you look for?
Yeah, Okay, now I left the orchestra as chief conductor in 2014, and now it's 7 years later, but I have been back to the orchestra, so I conducted them every second year probably. So it's not that I have been away and come back after 20 years to an old place. So the sound or the approach hasn't really changed. I think the orchestra is in an excellent condition. They play very, very well. And there are many new players, which partly we appointed during my time, and new players since then. In general, when I work with a QSO or with the QSO, is different, because when you are chief conductor or principal conductor or have been working with the same ensemble for a long time, you always build on previous work. Yeah, and you know the orchestra quite well, and the orchestra knows you quite well. So we don't have this first get to know each other time, which happens when you come to the first time to a new orchestra. So the work is quite efficient from the beginning every time, and you can build on previous experiences, and the orchestra knows what I expect. And in terms of sound, I like the sound the great German orchestras produce, with a very blending in the sections, so that the brass and the winds and the strings, it's one sound with many colors within that mammoth sound, big sound, rather than single sections sticking out. And of course, ensemble is one of the major things, and intonation and all the things you know from rehearsals in the orchestra. What instrument are you playing?
Violin.
Violin. Yeah, good. So you play all the many notes. You have one of the thick parts, especially with Mahler. The violins have never a rest. Now, can I ask you a question as a violinist?
Sure.
Yeah, as Simon mentioned before, Mahler gives many instructions in the score, and the violins are the ones who play the most notes of all parts, of all players in the orchestra. When you opened your parts the first time, how did you feel reading so many notes and so many instructions in terms of dynamic, style, and extra information? Is it a bit overwhelming?
A little bit. And I feel like, I guess the first time you're reading it through, or you're sight reading, I guess you're trying to survive and get as much as you can, but you definitely feel like you're glossing over a lot of the important terms that can, I guess, give you a lot more information. So definitely after that first rehearsal, went back to the score and looking up all the German to try and doing listening, I guess, because the notes, it doesn't seem like there's as many when you kind of know the overall score and how your part fits in.
Yeah, lots of work involved, and I'm very impressed, Simon, and with all you QYO musicians to tackle a huge piece like Mahler's 2. I mean, it's not only very complex to rehearse, to practice, and to play, but it's also very long. It needs lots of stamina to sit and to play through from the first part to the last part. And it doesn't get easier, and doesn't get. Yeah, you you are worn out after the 1.5 hours. Yeah.
I think we've been all enjoying the rehearsal process enormously. Unfortunately, got cut short just as we're approaching that final phase, the final 2 weeks, where we were starting to really run through whole movements and even let the movements run together. But it's been a fantastic journey. I've been so proud of the QAS musicians and how they've stepped up to the challenge. And we've been learning our German every Saturday morning. We kind of have a little quiz on what gemächlich and nicht eilen and all the various German terms. So it's been great fun.
Well, what is gemächlich in English?
I associate it with comfortable, but in the sense of easy, like sitting in a comfortable armchair, you know, that everything is very, I mean, how would you translate it?
I don't know. That's why I ask you. Yeah, gemächlich. Yeah, gemächlich has to do something with movement too. It's not just sitting. Gemächlich means moving, but in a comfortable, relaxed way.
Yeah. Yeah, because it start of the second movement, he writes gemächlich, nie eilen, immer
That one.
yeah, that's right.
Simon, one of your musicians mentioned that we haven't talked much about this Mahler symphonies. We can, I don't mind to talk a little bit about that if there are any questions.
Sure. Let me see. We have another question from Thomas Crilly, which isn't about a Mahler symphony, but Thomas, why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Hi, Johannes. Just wondering, have you ever considered a different career path? Or if it wasn't for music, what would you have pursued?
I was interested in medicine. I wanted to become a medical doctor.
When was the time when you decided?
That was in my year 9, because I was not allowed to go to high school because of political reasons. So that was the selection process for high school in East Germany was quite rigid, and only students who were true communists were allowed to go to high school.
And already at that age, you were somehow tested for your devotion to the system.
Yep. Oh yeah, well that was pretty clear, because being a son of a person who worked for the church was clearly not communist, and the regime tried to avoid people with different ideas to become influential within the society. So therefore, I was not allowed to study to become a school teacher or a law person or a doctor.
So do you think, had you gone to high school, you wouldn't have pursued a career in music? You would have studied medicine?
Yeah. Yeah,
wow. So we have you here in Brisbane as chief conductor of the QSO as a result of the harshness of the German communist regime.
Yeah, I'm not sad about it. I'm really enjoying my life as a musician.
Well, we enjoy it. I can't tell you how happy I think everybody in Brisbane is that you're returning to be chief conductor of the QSO. And what are you looking forward to most about living in Brisbane? Because I think you've told me that you didn't actually live in Brisbane when you were chief conductor, because you were splitting your time between Graz and...
Yeah, no, we never lived here. We had small children back then. We traveled a lot. Sue and the kids came with me, but I was mainly in Graz. And to be a chief conductor of a big opera company required me being there for at least 8 months, 8 months out of the year. And Sue partly at that time taught in Newcastle at the university. So I traveled between Austria and Sydney and Newcastle and here, and just came for the concert weeks. But we are moving here at the end of the year. We thought actually, no, it's now delayed to beginning of next year because of COVID, but we will move here. And we decided that before my return to the QSO happened. So we wanted to live in a bit warmer climate, because as beautiful Hobart is, it's bloody cold in winter.
Can I tell the QIS musicians a little secret that I know? Johannes is a very keen sailor, and I understand that you have a boat. Is it still moored in Hobart, and you plan to sail it up to Brisbane at some point?
Well, it's in Sydney, Pittwater at the moment. I wanted to sail it from Hobart to Sydney, but then I had to fill in for a conductor in Sydney with the Sydney Symphony, who couldn't come from Germany. It was Donald Runicles. He couldn't travel, so I had to fill in, and so I asked the friends to sail it up to Pittwater, and there it's waiting for me to sail the rest up to here to Brisbane. Okay. And I can't wait.
Well, I've volunteered in the past to be a deckhand. I don't know if you trust another conductor on your boat, but
You know, conductors are sometimes not so good in following instructions because they're used to give instructions.
My wife says the same thing.
But I think we'll manage because once you're out on sea, you don't have a choice.
No. We have one last question about Mahler. Oscar, do you want to go ahead?
Yes. Hi, Johannes.
Hi,
I was just quickly wondering, what is your favorite Mahler piece? So either symphony or, just work in general, and why?
I can't answer that question like this, Oscar. No, I can't answer it. I conducted all symphonies but the number 9 and 10. And number 1 is not my favorite. Number 2 is wonderful. Number 3 is phenomenal. 4, 5, 6, 7. I'm a big fan of number 7. I'm not the biggest fan of number 8 because I think it's musically not as complex and interesting as most of the others. I'm very much looking forward to do number 5 with the Conservatorium's orchestra in October. And by the way, that concert, we include at the beginning 5 songs by Alma Mahler. A whole complex of Mahler's life we haven't touched at all. So you might know that Mahler married Alma Schindler, who was a fascinating young lady and a fascinating woman within the Vienna society. She was quite a bit younger than him and was a composer herself, studied with Zemlinsky, amongst others. And before they got married, Mahler said to her, I'm really completely crazy about you and I want to marry you. And actually in the slow movement in his 5th symphony, he wrote as a sort of a gift for her to show his love, the famous Adagietto. But he said, if we get married, you are not allowed to write a single note on your own anymore, because in our relationship, I'm the composer, you are the wife. And she agreed. And there is not much of her compositions left or available to us, but 2 song cycles she wrote for piano and song and voice, and some contemporary composers, nowadays contemporary composers orchestrated some of the songs, and we will perform 5 of those songs before the symphony. And those songs were written during the years when he wrote his 5th symphony, just before they got married. So it's quite interesting. So we start with the 5 songs and go straight into the symphony, perform the first 2 movements, and then have a break, and then do the last 3. So he was a bit a maniac, no? That Mahler guy. Yeah. And if you look into symphonies, all the instructions is not because he had nothing better to do, but write tempo instructions and dynamic instructions. No, he was so panicking about that people would not do what he wanted to do. So, and I don't think he was a very easy person to be with, to live with, or to work with. And if you look at his biography, and if you would hand in a biography like this for a job application, you wouldn't get the job, because they would look at it and say, okay, you stayed here 6 months, and then there 1 year, and then here 2 years, and then here 1 year. So what's wrong with you? Because he got in fight with everyone after a couple of weeks. And I exaggerate a little bit, but that was his personality. And coming back to your question, Oscar, I don't have a favorite symphony. I love the symphonies dearly and perform them, but I love Bruckner more.
Bruckner 7?
Bruckner 7, all Bruckner symphonies.
As a home player, Bruckner 7 or Bruckner 4?
No, number 5, number 8, number 6. Anyway, different talk, Simon.
No, well, it kind of brings us full circle. The organist in you kind of has reasserted himself.
More than that. I think, in short, Mahler looks more inside and Bruckner outside.
Yeah.
To the world, Mahler looks in all the world in himself. And but that's another talk. Takes more than an hour.
Maybe in a year or two, we'll program a Bruckner Symphony, or we can organize to have another chat about Bruckner.
Love to.
Johannes, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure talking with you, and thank you for sharing all your insights with the QAS musicians. We better let you get to your rehearsal.
Yeah, and thanks for the chat. Lovely to see you, and to everyone on the screens. As I said at the beginning, I know how it feels to miss a performance. I had 3 concerts planned for last week here with the QSO with Tchaikovsky No. 6, which is one of the incredible, amazing pieces, and it was such a disappointment not to be able to do that. So I can really feel with you, but it will happen, and keep practicing and keep positive. We go through extremely to extreme times at the moment, but it will end at some stage, and music and getting together as an orchestra and as an ensemble can help us to get through those times.
Thank you, Johannes. We opened our season this year with Tchaikovsky 6, so we have some sense of how special a piece that is and
what it is
like to not perform it. So
yeah, and I keep fingers crossed that your Mahler 2 will happen very soon, and you will enjoy playing that incredible, beautiful piece.
We hope so. We'll find a way.
Okay.
Thanks so much, Johannes.
Thank you, Simon. Have a good day, everyone, or a good weekend.
You too.
And see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Johannes. Thanks, Simon.
Oh, sorry. Have I left the meeting yet?
No, yes.
No. Okay, I have to press a button. Okay, I see you a couple of weeks, Simon. Yeah, we line something up.
Yeah, that sounds great. Look forward to it.
Good.
Okay.
Good. Bye-bye. Talk soon. Bye.